Today, I'm pleased to have landlord attorney Ernie Garcia with us. Ernie came to raise attention last month. I think he heard you on a video or a podcast, and he knew right away that we wanted you to come to our group. And you came to our group. Ernie, thanks for your tip of the month at the Greater Houston RIA last Saturday. We liked you so much. You're our featured speaker at our June 11th meeting. For anyone who owns a rental, you won't want to miss that. Ernie, I imagine you see a lot of tired landlords these days. Houston's not like a small town in Alabama, but you have to see many landlords feeling like the ones I ran across here.
Yeah, it's true. There's lots of landlords out there, new and seasoned landlords, and they've experienced all sorts of issues from this pandemic, and so we've had to adjust to the changes of the law and the changes of the situations that these landlords have found themselves in.
Wow. So if any tired landlords out there listening to this and you need relief, you can go to lonestarria.org and join with us. Or if you need legal advice, you can go to Ernie's website. It's easy to remember. It's attorneyeg.com. Again, that's attorneyeg.com. Ernie, I see on your site you can sign up for a 30-minute Zoom call for a reasonable fee. So check it out, attorneyeg.com. Because of the National RIA, our landlords have benefits that can help with what Ernie's going to share here. And I think I have more to say about that. So, Ernie, speak to that statement. Tenant screening can make or break your landlord-tenant experience.
Sure. So, we see all sorts of problems that come into the office from the landlord perspective, and they come to us as problems. What I'm talking about today is a way for landlords to prevent these problems from ever occurring. And one way is when we look backwards in time at what went wrong, we notice that the tenant screening part of the evaluation of a tenant is what was lacking. Had a landlord, for example, done a credit check, oh, they're a nice guy, they were referred to me by a friend, and so you skip the credit check, and you could have found out earlier in the process that a simple credit check would show that the tenant that you're looking to reside in your $2,000 a month property could never afford that, or has had a hard time paying their bills in the past, and so they might not be a good fit. So, a credit check is essential, and if you can find a company that can run credit, employment, rent history, even criminal history, that's a key strategy to ensuring that the tenant you have in place is qualified to be there and will ultimately be a good fit for you long term.
Yeah, so Rent Perfect is one of those sites. There are others, but again, as a RIA member, you would get a discount on that, and you might also be in a community that's using the same platform. There's some advantages to that. So you mentioned credit and employment. Did you mention rent history and going back on that? And then I'm wondering, is it possible to contact previous landlords if that's something that you're asking, or can you do that?
You absolutely can. So in terms of rent history, this would include any check for prior judgments that were issued against a tenant. Sometimes just a simple check of court records, and depending on the company that you use, they'll scour court records looking for these names. If you have a name match to a prior address or a prior landlord, you might find that someone has been evicted multiple times, and that should be an automatic red flag for you. In terms of reaching out to previous landlords, there's kind of a tricky situation, especially to the most recent landlord, because imagine a landlord who is really anxious to get rid of a bad tenant. They might say whatever it takes to make sure they're not having to deal with them anymore. So I would take that reference with a grain of salt. I would actually suggest that you call the landlord that was previous to the last, if you can. Your tenant doesn't always have that, but if they can't produce a decent rental history, a reliable rental history, again, red flag.
Right, and something practical that they can do if you're in real estate investing is pretty easy for us to go back and find the property owner that's just tax records. And so if they can give you that address of that previous spot, I can just see the unsuspecting person getting duped. In fact, I had that experience as an employer one time. I called someone, and they were just very glad to give me some really good information on this employee, and it was not that at all. So wow.
For more information just like this, please follow us on Instagram, join our Facebook group, and if you enjoy this content, give us a like. And if you're not yet a subscriber, please consider subscribing.
Wow.
Thanks.
Are there any other people that you find that are just unaware of something like tenant screening? Your first impressions. I pride myself on being able to judge someone's character.
Sure.
And I've been burned. So yeah, tell us a story. It sounds like you have something.
No, absolutely. The tenant screening that tends to, bite a landlord in the rear is the kind of screening that never happens. So you might find a very qualified, very capable person who signed a lease for whom you've done a thorough background check. All the boxes are yes, A+ for this guy, but they're the only ones you checked. Mm-hmm. And it turns out multiple other adults are residing on the premises. But because you got that one winner on the lease, you decide, I'm done. That's a poor way of screening. You can't just screen the best of them. You have to screen the rest of them. And if you don't, you're going to fail. Because what may happen is that person who filled out the application may not actually even reside on the property. They're there as a shield to the really terrible tenants who will actually be on the property. By doing an incomplete check, you're doing yourself a huge disservice.
Wow. And when you say get all of them, there's probably some legal reasons that they'd want to do that for discrimination laws and things like that. Is that a concern or?
No. I mean, if you are applying your standards, right, you see, you need a certain credit score, you need a certain employment record, you need a certain criminal history record, you need a certain rental history, I've actually created what I call a tenant scorecard. And so landlords can use this. You can actually download it from my website. You can use this tenant scorecard and assign a point value to each of these things. And you decide, well, what's a passing grade for me? And as long as you apply this strategy equally to all of your prospective tenants, you're not going to run afoul of this kind of discrimination claim. But in terms of getting all the adults, you want your lease to have every adult who will reside listed on your lease. In fact, you want all persons named. If they're minors, they're occupants. But if they're adults, they are tenants who will sign and obligate themselves to this lease. That should be hands down the absolute approach. Too many landlords come to me with leases where one person signed as the tenant, but 4 other adults are residing there, and that tends to spell trouble. There's a reason that these adults are not subjecting themselves to screening, and it's usually a bad one.
Wow. I'm just thinking now about how that could really bite someone. Oh, I got a roommate. Mm-hmm. And they just never get on, but you want them on that lease, actually.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because if, let's say, the primary person skips out and only the roommate's left behind, you can't get a judgment against that roommate because that roommate didn't sign the lease and is not subject to any of the terms. In any eviction proceeding, you would actually have to sue the original signer. That's the only way to legally proceed if you intend to collect rent, right? They are still obligated. And so if everyone's on the lease, then everyone is equally obligated, whether one skips out early or not.
Wow. And a little bit later, we're going to be talking about the lease, but wow. The Tenant Scorecard. Tell us a little bit about what went into that. I mean, is there a story behind it, or?
Well, I mean, it's compiled of my years of experience dealing with the kinds of problems that are easily anticipated that we see a mile down the road if we have the data. And too many times landlords kind of, they'll come to me and say, Ernie, if I'd known better, I would not have gone down this way. And so you kind of retroactively, what would you have done in this situation? And so over the years, these are the 10 topics, and the scorecard lists all 10. And you can give each, its own corresponding value as to its importance to you. But yeah, it was compiled from years of hearing landlords talk to me about problems that could have been foreseen at the application process.
So, anything else you want to talk about on the tenant screening can make or break your landlord? I just make or break, and so it's really critical that you can do make or break. When I hear that, there's a few small details you can take here that's going to turn this into a success rather than a disaster.
Absolutely. One that happens way too often is I see landlords who are willing to take on a new tenant who can't quite pay the first month's rent and the full deposit. That also should be a huge red flag that the tenant simply cannot afford the leasehold. If they need time to pay these, and you might stop and say, well, Ernie, that's a lot to ask for a new tenant. It should not be a lot for you to ask a tenant who you have confidence in, whose money is well enough to sustain them throughout the entire lease term. If they're having trouble right off the bat, that's a sign that they probably are not a good fit.